Hello and welcome to the Royal Holloway edition of Art Unlocked with Art UK and Bloomberg Philanthropies. My name is Dr Naomi Lebens and I'm the College Curator and Head of Cultural Services at Royal Holloway, University of London. I'm starting my presentation with a slide that showcases our elaborate and highly ornamented Founders Building, commissioned from the architect William Henley Crossland in 1879 and based on the model of the French Renaissance Château de Chambord in the Loire Valley, fetchingly translated into Victorian red brick. The picture also showcases the college founders, Thomas and Jane Holloway, in the imposing central sculpture by Count Victor Gleichen. For Thomas and Jane, Holloway College was a philanthropic as well as a legacy exercise, as they had no heirs to leave their fortune to as they reached their later years. Inspired, we think, by Jane, who described women as the greatest sufferers, it was to be a pioneering institution that offered higher education to female students at a time of great educational inequality. Sadly, Jane died in 1875, before the college project was begun in earnest. For a time, Thomas Holloway had been the richest man in Britain. He was an entrepreneurial success story of the kind the Victorians took great pride in. Born to a family of bakers and pub owners, he made his fortune, in effect, as a snake oil salesman hawking cure-all pills and ointments made from everyday household items such as beeswax, resin, and paraffin. Thankfully, his medicines did no harm, but it certainly wasn't their efficacy that secured his success. Holloway hit on the magic power of advertising, experimenting with innovative methods from producing cigarette cards to plastering giant billboards at far-flung locations, including the Great Pyramid of Giza and Niagara Falls. He later wrote, "I made up my mind to be content with nothing less than girdling the globe with the depots of my remedies." But it wasn't until he married Jane in 1840 that his business really took off. Indeed, the previous year, he had ended up in debtor's prison and had to be bailed out by his mum. A magnificent picture gallery, seen here as it is today, wasn't part of the original plan for Holloway College. In the 1880s, Thomas sent his brother-in-law on a fact-finding mission to review other ladies' colleges around the world. Hearing reports that Vassar College in New York State had a fabulous art collection, he decided that his college must have one too. The room you can see on this slide was quickly repurposed from a general recreation space to a gallery, but the problem remained that Holloway College didn't have an art collection to fill it. Thus began a spending spree. Holloway purchased 77 paintings between 1881 and 1883, the year he died, to hang in the gallery. Much to the consternation of contemporary dealers, he purchased most of these directly at auction and often at record prices that had an inflationary impact on the rest of the market. Holloway could have what he wanted, and what he wanted was a modern and contemporary collection for his students, comparable then to introducing something akin to Tate Modern into a university campus today. His collection is also thought to be the first specifically aimed at a female audience in Britain, and the works he selected are revealing in theme, subject, and style, both as a microcosm of high Victorian taste and of the educational and social aspirations Holloway held for the young women who attended his college. One of Holloway's earliest acquisitions for the collection, and still a firm favourite among today's visitors, is John Everett Millet's Princes in the Tower. The subject of the painting is the 12-year-old Edward V of England and his 10-year-old brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York, who disappeared after they had been taken into the Tower of London, supposedly in preparation for the young king's coronation. Their father, King Edward IV, had died of ill health in April 1483. Before his death, he had asked his brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, to act as Lord Protector until his son could be crowned. At first, all seemed as it should. The Duke of Gloucester pledged his loyalty to the prince, but soon started acting suspiciously. He had the prince's supporters killed. He seized them away from their mother, who had taken them into sanctuary, and he postponed Edward's coronation indefinitely until he gained enough support to invoke Titulus Regius. This act of Parliament denounced Edward and Richard as illegitimate because their father had promised to wed another woman before marrying the prince's mother, Elizabeth Woodville. The Duke of Gloucester took the throne himself as Richard III in July 1483. Soon afterwards, the young princes were no longer seen playing about the tower. Richard was widely suspected of having the boys murdered, a tyrannous and bloody act that had famously been dramatised by Shakespeare in his emotional stage adaptation of Sir Thomas More's early 16th century history of King Richard III. More, who as a Tudor loyalist had a vested interest in publicly denigrating any Plantagenet claim to the throne, had described how Richard had ordered the princes' bodies to be buried at the foot of a staircase in the White Tower, deep under the ground under a great heap of stones. In fact, 2 skeletons around the same age as the boys were discovered under an external staircase during a demolition at the tower in 1674. In his painting, Millet presents the princes alone, holding on to one another in the dark as an ominous shadow appears at the top of the staircase above them. Light shines on their faces, illuminating their pure, pale complexions in sharp contrast to their dark surroundings. Their stillness and graceful poise in the face of what we, the viewers, know of their fate heightens the emotional tension of the scene. For a female audience, who were understood in the 19th century to be more susceptible to a sympathetic, felt response to art, perhaps this image was assumed or indeed intended within the Holloway collection to be particularly powerful. It also connects to the developing intellectual concept of childhood as a state of innocence in need of protection from the corrupting influences of the adult world. When it was first exhibited, Millet's painting was highly praised for its historical authenticity in its details of costume and setting, which, as we will see in the next painting, are prominent themes across the Holloway collection. The artist Edwin Long took 2 years to complete this monumental painting, over 3 meters wide, which was a sensation picture when it was first exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1875. It secured his position as one of the period's top Orientalist painters, and he gained the Associate Royal Academician status that had so far eluded him the following year. Scenes of ancient Assyria and Babylon were particularly demode at the time, motivated by excavations that had sent several artifacts back to the British Museum. Long studied these in detail, as well as travelling widely in Egypt and Syria in 1874, sketching numerous studies from life to use in his painting. Accuracy was important to Long and was highly appreciated by his contemporary critics. But beyond realism and accuracy, several references were also made in the press to the painting's amusing nature. It is not perhaps what we would call funny today. The subject is taken from the histories of Herodotus, the 5th century BC Greek historian, or more precisely, from George Swain's book about Herodotus, published in 1870, which explained the custom of the Babylonian marriage market and was quoted in the Royal Academy catalogue entry for Long's painting. Every year, girls of marriageable age were put up for auction in the order of most attractive to least. According to Swain's account, the greatest beauty was put up first and knocked down to the highest bidder, then the next in order of comeliness, and so on to the damsel who was equidistant between beauty and plainness, who was given away gratis. Then the least plain was put up and knocked down to the gallant who would marry her for the smallest consideration, and so on, until even the plainest was got rid of to some cynical worthy who decidedly preferred lucre to looks. The dowries paid for the prettiest brides, therefore, were used to compensate those who accepted less comely spouses. The Victorians liked to see themselves as advanced in comparison to such societies that they deemed primitive in their practices. But therein lies the hidden humour of Long's painting. Rather than a flattering point of contrast to modern Victorian society, Victorian audiences and critics understood in this subject an unflattering parallel to practices still common in modern society. So much so that this cartoon, published in the popular Punch magazine in 1876, reimagined Long's painting as the modern Babylonian marriage mart. Contemporary debates raged around the rights of married women, who only as recently as 1870, with the first Married Women's Property Act, had been allowed modest rights to keep earned income and inheritances. Many, possibly including Long, felt that this did not go far enough, but it wasn't until 1882 that much more sweeping property rights were granted to women, which confirmed them as having a separate legal status entirely to their husbands. Long undoubtedly adheres to several racist tropes and patronizing Orientalist attitudes in the Babylonian marriage market. But was the painting also a vehicle of social progress of its time? When standing in front of the picture, the viewer is notably invited into the women's space, barriered off from the men beyond. The scale from beauty to ugliness among the women is not as straightforward or overtly caricatured as it could be. It is the women who engage us and each other who are endowed with emotional complexity and depth, whilst the men are mindlessly captivated by beauty on display, or, in the case of a few sad individuals, shown avariciously guarding and evaluating their wealth. Is Long, then, making a more sensitive point about the subjectivity of beauty and its distracting power here, about the relative emotional and social values of men and women? And what, too, does Holloway's decision to bring this picture into the environment of a women's college suggest? Education, after all, was a way in which women could newly, if they so desired, become independent of the marriage market entirely and seek to support themselves instead through employment. Holloway paid a record price of £6,615 for this painting, over £800,000 in today's money. Its message, or at least the questions it raised, were clearly important within the collection he was building. As popular as history paintings were as a vehicle for reflection on contemporary life itself is the subject of William Powell Frith's The Railway Station, another work that caused a sensation when it was first put on public display in 1862. It was commissioned by the London dealer Louis Victor Flatow in 1860 for what everybody at the time considered way over the odds. He paid Frith £4,500, over £500,000 today, and an additional £750, over £85,000 today, just so it wouldn't be put on public exhibition at the Royal Academy and could only be displayed at his Haymarket Gallery. But it turned out to be a canny move on Flatow's part. He charged every visitor to his gallery £1 to see the picture, and reportedly over 80,000 people came to see it. So, what inspired Flatow's confidence, and just why was this picture so popular? Well, the Victorians liked to see at least this kind of aesthetically sanitized version of their bustling society reflected back at them. Social and cultural progress, driven by a sense of industry and innovation, was something that they took great pride in. No better setting for this than Paddington Station. The magnificent new terminal by celebrated engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel opened in 1854. At the time, it was the largest train shed roof in the world and the first large permanent building entirely lit with gas. Train travel and the rapidly growing train network had revolutionized Victorian Britain, offering new opportunities for travel, holidays, transporting goods, developing businesses, and the growth of towns and cities. But the station itself is not the true subject of this picture. Indeed, Frith employed a specialist in architecture painting, William Scott, to assist with the accurate rendering of the building. In the painting, the building's real function is rather to provide a context for, and perhaps partial explanation of, the melting pot crowd scene beneath it. A sharp contrast exists between the repetitive ironwork and mass of identical units in the upper portion of the picture and a human drama that fills and activates the platform. This rendering of humanity was Frith's focus and speciality. At first, the crowd scene might appear to be something of an undifferentiated mass. But in fact, it is ordered into discrete compositional groups, and a 30-page pamphlet was published together with the painting to explain the different characters and their narratives, right down to their individual thoughts and feelings. This includes the artist Frith himself, who shows himself together with his family in the centre of the picture as they send their son off to boarding school. He looks down on the scene as his wife kisses the boy clutching a cricket bat goodbye. The fact that Frith presents himself as the consummate family man in the centre of the piece conveniently overlooks the fact that by 1862 he also had a second family with his mistress Mary Alford and 3 further children. The man in the fur-lined coat is based on a Venetian nobleman who taught Frith's daughters Italian. He gives money to the man on his left, showcasing his charitability and wealth. Just above, a soldier in red kisses his child as he either leaves for deployment or arrives home. Next to them is a bride saying goodbye to her bridesmaids as she embarks on her new married life. Her young sister cries next to her and is comforted by a little boy holding a pansy. Victorians used a language of flowers to communicate different emotions, and a pansy represented thoughtfulness. On the far right, we see 2 celebrated detectives from Scotland Yard arresting a criminal about to make a quick getaway. Despite this vibrant mix of characters on the platform, the Victorians could rest easy that their penchant for order and hierarchy would soon be re-established as the crowds filtered onto the train itself, and passengers would travel with their social peers in first, second, or third class carriages. This painting wasn't the first of Frith's panoramic scenes of contemporary life to cause a stir. His Life at the Seaside, exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1854, inspired frenzied crowds and was purchased by Queen Victoria. His Derby Day, exhibited in 1858, was similarly successful. By 1860, when he started the railway station, Frith, who was the son of a hotel landlord and grew up in Harrogate, was a fully fledged Royal Academician and who had pioneered his own populist genre of genre painting. Hailed as the modern Hogarth, he argued for the importance of paintings as visual historical documents to capture the spirit and sentiment of an age. Flatow wasn't betting blind when he commissioned Frith for his most ambitious painting yet. A later addition to the collection at Royal Holloway includes this preliminary oil sketch for the railway station, lightly presented to Flatow and used to establish the overall composition and relationship of the various groups. More finished sketches would subsequently have been produced before the final painting was commenced. The dealer Henry Graves, who bought the painting from Flatow, also had this official engraving made after the work in 1866 by Frank Holl and sold to a waiting list of subscribers. Such reproductions allowed the painting to become a prominent domestic fixture, seen by audiences far beyond those who queued to see it in the flesh. Holloway purchased the picture for his college in 1883 directly from Graves, 21 years after it was first exhibited. He wanted it so much he broke with his normal pattern of eschewing dealers as middlemen. It is tempting to think that the pride in progress, industry, and achievement expressed through Frith's image appealed on a direct personal level to Holloway and was something he wanted to communicate to the aspiring students who studied at his college and with whom he shared his personal motto, nil desperandum, or never despair. Holloway achieved his own great break and success at a similar time as Frith's painting was exhibited, and his own glistening career and legacy speak to the same sense of achievement through industrious improvement that was seen to drive Victorian Britain. Rather than success, the final painting that I'm highlighting today, from the Holloway collection at least, deals with the subject of failure. In Man Proposes, God Disposes, celebrated academician and animal painter Sir Edwin Landseer presents us with an imagined scene of nature's dominance over man and the aftermath of the fated expedition to find the Northwest Passage led by Sir John Franklin in 1845. Before the expedition, Franklin was an experienced Arctic explorer looking to regain former glory. Aged 59, he was sixth choice for command of the expedition, but found himself at the helm when the others refused. In 1845, in May, he set sail from Kent with 29 men on board 2 ships, HMS Terror and HMS Erebus. They were last seen off the coast of Greenland in July. It appeared the ships and crew had completely disappeared. Following campaigns from the wives of the men on board, a mission was later launched to find them. 2 Scottish explorer surgeons, Sir John Richardson and Sir John Ray, set off in 1848. Ray was known for his respectful treatment of Indigenous peoples and survival skills. Finding nothing, Ray stayed in Canada for a few more years until in 1853 he started exploring new territory along the Back River and met an Inuit possessing items from the Franklin expedition, including medals, cutlery, and coins. Ray began interviewing the Inuit and understood that he had encountered the remains of Franklin's crew in 1850. In 1854, Ray wrote a report noting that the ships had struck ice and all the crew had perished. Most gruesome of the discoveries were the marks of cannibalism found on the bones of the crew. Ray noted, "It is evident that our wretched countrymen had been driven to the last resource." Unknown to Ray, the Admiralty published his report in full in the London Times that year. When he returned to England, he was denounced by many who were outraged and appalled by the thought of British heroes being reduced to cannibalism, including the author Charles Dickens, who tried to discredit the Inuit as untrustworthy. Despite the outrage, the expedition's story inspired a lot of public interest, with Landseer's painting reflecting this. He used Ray's report to paint the picture, which depicts a dramatic yet desolate Arctic wasteland, violently dissected in the foreground by a ship's fallen mast. Eerie polar light shines on the horizon and bathes the scene in an otherworldly glow. 2 ferocious polar bears, both bearing their fangs, occupy either side of the pole. On the left, one bear savagely tears a piece of fabric from the wood. The other bear is depicted in the act of chewing on bones, eyes closed in pure primal pleasure. Beneath him are more discarded bones from what is clearly a human ribcage. Man Proposes was one of the earliest pieces Holloway acquired for the collection in 1881. We don't know exactly why he wanted the painting so much, although his personal interest in the Franklin expedition was revealed by the piles of newspaper clippings about the episode he kept and which were discovered after his death. When thinking about the purpose of the work within the broader collection, the painting may also have been envisaged as a source of debate about man's connection to nature, fate, religion, technology, and the environment, or simply the value of geographic and scientific exploration. In 1985, Royal Holloway College merged with Bedford College and became part of the University of London. Established in 1849 by the wealthy widow, suffragist, abolitionist and social reformer Elizabeth Jesser Reed, Bedford College was founded as the very first higher education institute for women in the UK and had pioneered the study of traditionally masculine subjects for female students. As well as shared values, however, the merger also brought together 2 art collections. One of Bedford College's most prominent benefactors had been Wilmot Herringham, whose wife Christiana was an influential figure within the women's suffrage movement and a distinguished artist. Wilmot bequeathed Christiana's extensive art collection to Bedford College after her death in 1929. The majority of this collection represents Christiana's own work, of which this Head of St. Catherine is an arresting example. Copied from the early Florentine Renaissance artist Sandro Botticelli's Sant'Ambrogio altarpiece of around 1470, it reflects Christiana's engagement with the pre-Raphaelite and aesthetic movements, which championed the work of Botticelli, previously deemed primitive, but who they rediscovered and celebrated for his decorative linearity, portrayals of feminine beauty and imaginative breadth. The practice of copying, especially by female artists in the 19th century, had associations with amateur practice and feminine accomplishment, but Christiana elevated it through intense scholarly application to material investigation as part of her copying practice, especially in the medium of tempera. This technique of painting with pigments bound in water-soluble emulsions, mostly egg yolk, required great preparation, precision, patience, and control, as the quick-drying paint was painstakingly layered to render delicate surface textures and tones, such as can be seen here. In 1889, Herringham produced a new translation of Cennino Cennini's 14th century treatise on tempera and fresco painting, Il Libro dell'Arte, which, with her own introduction, which gave a huge boost to the wider popularity of the technique. She also co-founded, together with Joseph Southall and Marianne Stokes, the Society of Painters in Tempera. By isolating St. Catherine here from Botticelli's wider multi-figure composition in the altarpiece, Herringham emphasises the female saint's gravitas and stature, making her the sole focus of the viewer's attention. The St. Catherine picture formed a pair with a head of St. Magdalene copied from the same source. Images of saintly womanhood were a particularly popular theme in the suffrage movement, which Herringham, as I've noted, was heavily involved in. Also showcased here are examples from our collections of Herringham's intricate mixed media botanical studies, and one of her copies of the Buddhist paintings from the walls of the Ajanta caves, which Herringham made during visits to India with the help of her assistant and students from the Calcutta School of Art. Her Times obituary described how the paintings were often difficult to see and still more difficult, even dangerous to reach, making it a heroic and extremely exacting task. Herringham was also a prominent supporter of fellow female artists, especially those she was connected to through suffrage networks, such as Annie Swinnerton, who she met through her friendship with Millicent Fawcett, president of the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies. Swinnerton's symbolist work and portraits were celebrated by leading artists, notably John Singer Sargent, leading to her becoming the first elected woman member of the Royal Academy of Arts in 1922 since its inception in 1768. Swinnerton and Herringham had also both been founding members of the Women's Guild of Arts, established in 1907. Christiana Herringham's two sons, Christopher and Geoffrey, are the subject of this striking ethereal portrait by Swinnerton, in which they are shown taking a rest from gardening as the sun sets. Their clothes and outdoor activity suggest that Herringham followed the progressive approach to parenting, favoured by many in the arts and crafts movement, who believed that children should have access to fresh air and wear clothes which would allow them to move freely instead of tight, restrictive outfits. Christopher, on the left, is seated on a wheelbarrow, which may have been an artistic vehicle to allow him to sit while he posed for the picture, as he suffered from rheumatoid arthritis and very sadly died just 2 years after this portrait was painted. Tragically, Geoffrey Herringham was also later killed while serving in the First World War in 1914. That sad note brings my talk to this evening to an end, and I'd just like to really thank everybody this evening for joining me, and Art UK and Bloomberg Philanthropies for the opportunity to share our collection with you as part of the Art Unlocked programme. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you very much.